Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing, as highly requested, the M.B.157, a French fighter aircraft code to Tier 3 and a battle rated of 3.3. For the purposes of today's historical overview, as the M.B.157 represents the end of a long line of French fighter designs, we'll be providing a holistic review of the Bloch M.B.150 through to the final conclusion, which is the 157. With that, we begin thus. On the 13th of July 1934, the French Air Force issued the C-1 design specification for a new, modern single-seat interceptor fighter. This was to replace the Air Force's existing complement of D-Watine D-371 and D-500 aircraft. A number of companies competed for the specification contract, including Société des Avions Marcel Bloch, or MB in short. The MB design team, as headed by Maurice Roussel, designed the Bloch M.B.150, an all-metal stress-skin monoplane as powered by a single 930 horsepower Gnome Rhone 14 KFS radio engine and armed with two Hispano HS-404 cannon as mounted in the wings. The prototype, MB150.01, entered construction in September of 1935, and despite the eventual awarding of the C-1 design contract to Morane-Saulnier's MS-406 design, the prototype was finished and entered testing in 1936. Unfortunately, during its inaugural flight, the prototype failed to leave the ground on takeoff, leading to development work being postponed. It was only in early 1937 that development resumed, with the intention of ensuring the plane could actually take off. This led to a number of design changes: a strengthened wing of greater surface area, redesigned landing gear, and the installation of the more powerful 940 horsepower Gnome Rhone 14N0 radial engine. These changes led to the MB150 prototype making its first successful test flight on the 29th of September 1937, and further testing of this prototype showed that the design had potential and warranted further development. Hence, in early 1938, the following changes were made to the design: a minor increase in the plane's wingspan, the removal of the wing-mounted radiators, switching to a single radiator mounted between the landing wheel wells, and the installation of the improved but same power output Gnome Rhone 14N7 radial engine. The modified prototype underwent subsequent trials in the spring of 1938, and it was the success of these trials that led to a pre-production order of 25 aircraft being requested by the Société Nationale des Constructions Aéronautiques du Sud-Ouest, or the SNCASO, into which Bloch had been merged on the 16th of November 1936. However, it was soon realised that the MB150 in its current design state was not suitable for mass production, meaning it had to be redesigned once more. This led to the plane's wing surface area being reduced and the Gnome Rhone 14N11 engine being selected for installation. This redesign became the MB151, whose prototype, the MB151.01, flew for the first time on the 18th of August 1938. Unfortunately, the initial test flights were not promising, as the plane experienced significant engine overheating issues and struggled to reach its estimated top speed of 480 km an hour or 298 miles per hour. These issues were to be rectified with the MB152, which initially fielded the more powerful 1030 horsepower Gnome Rhone 14N21 radial engine. The prototype, designated as MB152.01, underwent its initial test flight on the 15th of December 1938, and following this test flight, the engine was switched to the more mass production suited Gnome Rhone 14N25 1000 horsepower radial engine. The net result of the prototype's successful test program, in the case of the MB152, was that the French Air Force ordered 340 MB152s and 60 MB151s by March of 1939. The MB152 was regarded as the first true production variant of the series. The MB153 and 154 variants followed on soon after, and were intended as testbeds for the American Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp and Wright R1820 Cyclone engines respectively. Only the 153 made it to the prototype in stages, with the prototype crashing and being beyond repair only a couple of days into its test program. The MB155 was designed in late 1939 as a long-range version of the MB152, fielding an enlarged internal fuel tank as mounted in the central fuselage, and revised aerodynamics to improve flight performance. The 155 entered production in 1940, with only 10 produced before the War of France in June of that year. The MB156 was a proposed uprated version, fielding the 1590 horsepower Gnome Rhone 14R4 radial engine, but never moved beyond the design stages. The ultimate version, which you're seeing on screen today, the M.B.157, was an M.B.152 with the installation of the known 14R4 engine. Only a single prototype was produced, as completed and flown under German supervision in 1942. It was to demonstrate phenomenal performance, but proceeded no further in the development stages, as the prototype was destroyed during an Allied air raid by the end of that year. And with our historical overview concluded, let's just take a look at how the M.B.157 handles in the skies of War Thunder Arcade. Today's gameplay comes to you from the airfield domination map Peleliu. For this we'll be using the following setup. Stealth belts are 20mm cannon, reasoning being that stealth belts in my experience prove to pack the greatest punch at dealing with any given foe in the skies. Add to that the lack of tracer in these belts, which complements our boom and zoom style of play, where we want to try and catch our foes by surprise, and if we happen to miss our target when we're on their 6th, they'll be not alerted to our presence or the lack of tracer whizzing past their cockpit. Our gun convergence is set to 400 meters, as is typical for my preferred style of playing boom and zoom, as not only does it work well, especially with the lack of ammo on this plane, we'll talk more about that later, but also enables you to switch into a turn fighter role when needs be, like when you're in a turn fighting engagement with a foe. In this plane you'll typically find them reaching out to 300 to 500 meters distance, so a 400 meter gun convergence will work well when we get guns on target. And finally, our fuel load, as per the norm, is set to 30 minutes to ensure we can make it to the end of the game, unscathed on fuel capacity. We begin our analysis then by noting that the climb rate of the 157 is rather strong at its batter rate and tier, but it is let down by one fundamental flaw, which means that as soon as you start seeing batter rate in 3.7 opposition and higher, you will start to feel a little bit behind the competition, and that is the consistency of the climb rate, whereas the likes of the C205 and the Messerschmitt 19F4 will be able to maintain their climb at a 25-degree climb angle all the way up to 4,000 meters plus. In this aircraft you'll find that after a short period you will need to level out and build up your speed. This plane cannot sustain itself in an extended climb for too long, and if you do try to pursue this approach, you'll find yourself dropping dangerously close towards your stall effects, which come in as early as 275 km an hour. More on that again later. So you need to use short bursts in order to gain altitude, but in those short bursts you can gain a phenomenal amount of altitude. It's meant that we're able to dive down this B-25J that's just taken out one of our friendly MiG-3s, and we do good damage to one of their fuel tanks, but not a critical hit. So we come around to try and deliver the coup de grace, and here we go. In opening fire we can see that we exhaust our ammunition very quickly, but we rip apart the B-25 and there's very little left of it. I mean, as it saunters off towards the edge of the map, it'll be out of the game at a later point. We need to go for a reload at this point, and this instantly brings us on to one of the key weaknesses of this plane. Not in terms of weaknesses in combat capability, but a weakness that if not handled correctly will really undermine your performance, and that is the limited ammo count. You have a total of 60 rounds per cannon, or 120 in all. This means that you have a very limited amount of ammunition in order to hit multiple foes with, or one large and durable foe such as a medium bomber, the example being that B-25 we engaged. If you happen to miss a considerable degree of your shots, add to that the rather fast firing nature of your cannon, you'll exhaust your ammunition much more quickly than you anticipated, and as a result of that, you'll find yourself needing a reload at a most inappropriate time. Which is why you will see over the course of this gameplay I am constantly using the breathing spaces between engagements to go for reloads, and where possible I'm trying to make sure I get every bit out of my ammunition, because if I don't, I know it's going to come back to haunt me at some point. The B-25 is gradually dropping altitude at this point. There's very little left of it in terms of controllability. We can see they're struggling to bring the plane around as they go towards the deep blue sea, and we start to prey on the enemy bombers that are coming out of spawn. This is something that the M.B.157 can do very well. It has an interceptor capability, as stated from its design principles when we talked about the history earlier on in this review. This is an aircraft that can do a lot of damage to enemy bombers, but due to limited ammo capacity, you'll want to focus on one bomber at a time. The only way you can mitigate this issue is if you go for the cockpit, particularly in a head-on, so long as the bomber does not have nose-mounted armament that's pilot-controlled, unlike a B-25. So dropping down the Heinkel 111 at this point, we can see that our short burst enables us to take out one of their gunners, and we can do considerable damage to the rear of the aircraft before breaking over. We've carried a lot of speed into our dive, whereby the maximum dive speed of this plane is 887 km an hour, and you'll find that your dive speed acceleration is rather nice, whereby it's fast up to 800 km an hour, but as soon as you hit 800 km an hour, you'll see your dive speed acceleration slope off dramatically. And this actually puts you at a disadvantage against the likes of the P-47s you'll face at your batter rate and tier, whereby those planes will have dive speeds in excess of 900 km an hour, and this becomes more pronounced when you're up tiered into batter rating 4.0 plus games, whereby you will find that a good number of your foes are able to reach dive speeds in excess of 900 km an hour, and therefore when trying to run from those foes, you may be able to outrun them in a short dive sprint, but not in the long duration. In going head to head with the Leo 451 there, excepting they've got a nose mounted machine gun, but it's not going to be as powerful as our 20mm cannon, we can see what we were talking about earlier being executed, whereby we can use our firepower to quickly dispatch that bomber and then tail onto the SB2 M105 and try to cut them apart. Unfortunately here we come in at a poor angle and a little bit too much speed, meaning that we're not able to get a clean shot on target, and we also have to react to the Hell Diver coming out of spawn towards us. We go for a reload at this point, and again we're trying to manage the reload in between engagements, whereby we can do a lot of damage. We just need to make sure as we pick up the assist on the SB2M that we do not overextend our ammo capacity. Fortunately for us, with the Spitfire coming on the Hell Diver, we can use that distraction to our advantage and swing around on the Hammerhead. Now coming back to the boom and zoom principles then, a couple of things you may have noticed. This plane does not seem to enjoy handling at high speed, which goes against its boom and zoom nature. Let's talk about the roll rate in particular. Your roll rate as standard is rather good. It's not exceptional by any means, but it's good enough. When you go above 550 km an hour, you'll find that your roll rate begins to lock up at quite a dramatic rate, and by the time you hit 700 km an hour, you'll have lost just over 50% of your roll rate. Add to that your elevator, which is average at best as standard, whereby between 600 and 700 km an hour you'll lose 25% of its performance capability, and on top of that your rudder is average at best once more, and that locks up between 500 and 650 km an hour, removing 50% of its performance capability. You've got quite a stiff plane in a high speed dive. But if we're going to use this plane for boom and zoom tactics, we need to manage that appropriately, which is why, as you've seen us a couple of times so far, we've missed our boom and zoom runs on bombers that have been flying in a straight line simply because we haven't managed our control surfaces appropriately. And again, this is where this plane punishes you very strongly if you start to make minor mistakes. We talked about ammo count, we've talked about high speed control, and here we try to get it right on the A20G Havoc and proceed to do so. We do look towards the P61 and we're going to go for them and try and rip them out of the sky as well, achieving critical hits and set them on fire before taking a brief amount of fire in return. Now what we've said about the control surfaces at high speed does extend to when we're at a general performance speed. In your ideal speed range you want to be between 400 and 500 km an hour, but as you start to go below that you start to see some adverse circumstances. When you hit 275 km an hour and below, you'll start to experience a heaviness in the control surfaces, particularly in the elevator, and this is extremely alarming. Whilst your stall speed is 120 km an hour, you start to experience stall effects as high as 275 km an hour. There is an inert heaviness to this plane, which seems to just force it to be in difficult situations where it just cannot be controlled very well in the low speed turn fight. Which means planes with wider turn circles, such as a P-39 Aerocobra, will start to capitalise on that and come around more effectively against you, or can use loops in particular to cut you to pieces. Whereby the looping capability of this plane is decent when it's in its ideal speed range, but once you go to extremely low speeds, below this 275 km an hour from the perspective of the plane, your loop circle becomes exacerbated, and it's a very wide loop circle to the point that you will not be able to outloop your foes. Which is why you'll find a lot of players will try to use loops against you when you go down to lower speeds, because if they can start to conduct a series of loops and your speed drops below say 350 km an hour from the outset, it's only going to get lower and lower as you conduct your loops, and you'll be in a very difficult position which you'll have trouble getting back from. The only way you can get away is by flying in a straight line or diving away if you've got the altitude to do so. Now it's not to say that this plane cannot turn fight, and we're about to see against an A36 that you can turn fight against a good number of foes, and it's typically those planes which also suit themselves to a boom and zoom role, whereby you could say that you're the better turn fighter out of the boom and zoomers that you'll see at your batter 18 tier. The A36 does have a slightly wider turn circle than our own plane, and we're going to capitalise on that, as they come in with a lot of speed and overextend. I mean, they can't get guns on us, and it's only for a couple of cuts, i.e. the sets of scissors, that we can get onto them and start to cut into them, damaging their tail first, which means they lose a bit of their elevator responsiveness, and we can see their turn circle getting wider and wider as a result of that, and we start to go for the coup de grace. Now we're making sure to manage when we open fire, and the reason we're doing this is because we've got the limited ammo, and we want this kill as the A36 pilot is trying to snap right out of the way before they juke into the water, and they've cut their splitters a little bit too low, and with a damaged elevator they weren't going to make it out of that alive as we pick up our 7th kill. Now your turn circle, for a bit of perspective, is roughly the same as say that of a Messerschmitt 19 ML4 at a batter rating of 3.0, which is a nice turn circle to have, and therefore you can outturn the likes of the A36, the LA5F at a batter rating of 3.3, but you're not going to be outturning the likes of your Kovlev Yak 1, alternatively a Spitfire Mark IIB, which means that in that middle ground you can use turn fighting as a substitute tactic. What we've seen so far is your main goal is interception and boom and zoom, but carefully controlled boom and zoom because of the high speed control lockup, which we've also mentioned. So you're getting a bit of a difficult picture with this plane, or at least that's what I personally feel in flying it, that it's a plane that's on very fine thresholds in terms of performance, and with the low speed problems that it encounters as well, it only gets harder and harder to manage. But on the plus side, what we should note is that the durability of this plane is rather positive in terms of airframe durability. This plane can soak up a considerable amount of damage, and that's even from 20mm cannon and higher calibers. Of course, if you get hit by a 37mm cannon from the likes of your Coffee Yak 9T, you're not going to be able to sponge that. But 20mm cannon shells are not going to rip you apart instantaneously, unlike what you can do to a good number of your opponents. The only downside to your durability is your engine, whereby in an amber state as it is now, it performs fine. But as soon as, in a yellow state I should say, it performs fine, but when it goes to an amber state, issues start to arise very quickly, whereby when it's in an amber condition, you'll lose 50% of your engine performance immediately. And that means that you cannot afford to get hit on your radial engine, because if you do so and you get into this amber state, you will need to go land or face reduced performance to a considerable degree and become undermined against your opponents. And therefore you can become overwhelmed very quickly in the fact that whilst you have a lot of speed from the outset, with your damaged engine you lose this ability to maintain speed, and therefore you struggle to get away or perform in the situations that you're confronted with. So going back to land is appropriate and straight away. Now outside of that, what we should also note is that the energy retention of this plane is very strong, and this is where the boom and zoom nature of the plane really comes to light. In terms of straight line energy retention, so when you come out of your dive, maintaining your speed, as soon as your speed drops below 700 km an hour, you will find that this plane holds its speed phenomenally, whereby you'll see it drip towards say 650 km an hour, then 600 km an hour at a very slow rate, and this makes it a very hard plane to catch, unless your foe had a speed advantage in the dive from the outset. In terms of horizontal energy retention, so in a turn fight, again you'll maintain your energy very well, and we saw that against the A36. As for vertical energy retention, you're just as good, whereby you can make a boom and zoom dive from say 5,000 meters altitude, drop down to 2,500 meters altitude, and then a return climb at a 30-degree angle, managing your weapon appropriately as well, you'll be able to regain all of the altitude you sacrificed and come back at roughly the same speed as what you started your dive at. This means that your boom and zoom potential is very strong, add to that your firepower, and you can really make things work. Of course, we've also talked about the weaker factors of this plane. And we broke off of the B-25 there because we were worried about taking subsequent damage to our engine. We did enough damage by the looks of things in order to put them out of the fight for the time being, as we now prepare to attack the enemy Wellington. But we can see here how we're having to manage our reload and try to get into a position whereby we'll be able to hit the Wellington just as our reload finishes. We do so appropriately, and we start to rip into them. And this is where maximising your reload skill on your crew is going to be very important on this plane, because you are going to use up your ammunition very quickly. Already down to 32 rounds against the B-25, it was enough to pick up our double ace. Going for a reload once more, having exhausted that ammunition, we see the Junkers 88 onto the distance, and we get ready to react, as this game comes towards its closing stages. Now outside of energy retention, let's talk about ideal altitude. Now one of the interesting points of this plane is that the maximum altitude limit of this aircraft is 5,300 meters. Above this point your engine performance begins to decay noticeably, and on top of that your elevator becomes extremely heavy, particularly once you hit 6,000 meters. And this means that planes such as the C-205 will be able to outperform you at the highest of altitudes, which you'll face every so often, particularly when you're on the Guinea Highlands map, i.e. the extreme high altitude map. However, the ideal altitude rate for this plane, in my experience, is between 2,500 and 4,500 meters, because you give yourself ample room to perform boom and zoom rolls, whereby you'll be able to intercept enemy aircraft through straight line performance or diving down on them, and on top of that, be able to dive down on those who occupy the low altitude spaces, which we've been doing in this airfield domination match all the way through the course of the game. And in return with your ability to build up speed at a considerable rate, whether it be in a straight line or in the dive, it means that you can swoop down, take out your foe, and then break back up and away. And through rinsing and repeating this, you'll find safety in your performance, safety in your firepower, and you'll never be in a disadvantageous situation. And when people prey on you from above, i.e. those who go to higher altitudes, i.e. 5,000 meters plus, you'll find that you've got the performance to be able to avoid them coming down on you hard, so long as you're observationally aware. In taking the reload at this point, we keep looking up to make sure there's nobody above us. And the final point that we should really talk about is straight line acceleration. Now the acceleration of this plane in a straight line from its stall speed is rather good, whereby on engine power alone you'll very quickly go up to 425 km an hour. You can push this up to 560 km an hour with war emergency power, but as soon as you hit these thresholds you'll find that your acceleration slopes off at a dramatic rate. But at your batter rate and tier, this is nothing to complain about. You've got one of the better accelerations in the competition pool. And in turn this means that when you need to, you can really start to build up speed, build up momentum, and get ready to go in for the strike run, as we're trying to here against the P40, alternatively the MS410. And in the end we elect the MS410 as they seem to be in the more exposed position, while Yak 9T trying to get a shot on them as well. We come swooping down, we take them out, and we can see that the P40 has also been eliminated. Another kill on our tally, our 12th and final kill of this match. And it's at this point that we just swoop away, using our great energy retention to do so, and just start building up our altitude and prepare ourselves for the next engagement. We can see even there in that very short period of fire, we used our 18 cannon rounds, almost a sixth of our ammunition. These cannon are extremely effective, but they fire so fast that you'll see all the rounds disappear before your eyes. Other than that, once you start to manage all the weaknesses of this plane and the strengths accordingly, what you can see is you can rack up considerable results. And whether it be an airfield domination game, an air domination game, or ground strike, this plane does work well. But it has a lot to manage in order to be used well. Unlike a good number of the planes that you've seen in the French tech tree so far, and indeed across all the tech trees, up to the batter rating of 3.3, a lot of the planes are very forgiving, and I personally feel this is not a forgiving plane. And you can see in a way that I've been playing on a bit of a knife edge compared to my more relaxed playstyle or conservative playstyle, where I've really been having to think every step of the way about, have I got enough ammunition to deal with this, have I come in with the right amount of speed, and when I've got it wrong I've been punished for it, and when I've got it right it's worked out really well. And this is one of those end-to-end planes, or one of those chalk and cheese planes. You're going to get it right and it's going to work, but if you don't get it right it's going to be a nightmare. But with that, the game comes to its end, and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. With our 12 kills and 3 assists, we're able to rack up 60,840 silver lions and 4,332 research points. To defeat the M.B.157 in a given matchup then, I can recommend one or two approaches. Option 1 is the standard approach, which would be to lure this aircraft into a low speed turn fight, particularly below 300 km an hour, as at this point the plane is going to be heading towards the stall characteristics, which are coming at 275 km an hour, which make the elevator of this aircraft in particular rather heavy, and it means that if you can start to throw some loops into the medley of the turn fight, you'll be laughing, as the M.B.157 pilot will be struggling to follow you in the turn fight, and therefore you'll be able to quickly come around on their 6, even if you do have the wider turn circle by standard in aircraft such as the P-39 Aerocobra, and you'll be able to rip them apart over time. Option number 2 is to go head to head with this aircraft in a plane that has nose mounted cannon armament, such as the Yakovlev Yak-1, or alternatively the Messerschmitt 19F4. Whereby the wing-mounted nature of the armament of the M.B.157 means that whilst it is very lethal when it hits, it's convergence reliant, and if the pilot has a preference for tighter convergences such as myself, then in a head-on at 1.1 km for example, they're going to struggle to hit the target, whereas you're going to have a field day with your nose-mounted armament. Obviously do not rely on this as a consistent means of taking down M.B.157s, as some pilots will have a preference for an 800 metre gun convergence on their 20mm cannon in the wings. But outside of those circumstances, hopefully today we've demonstrated that the 157 is a very powerful fighter interceptor aircraft, whereby for its batter rate and tier, its strong climb rate, albeit a little bit inconsistent, combined with its very strong firepower, albeit limited in capacity, means that it's able to shred foes very quickly and get into a position whereby it becomes a nightmare for bombers to deal with and can swoop down on foes with relative ease. But all this ease comes in with the limiter in the fact that this plane suffers at higher speeds in terms of controllability and really wants to avoid turn fights at low speeds where possible. And on top of that, for newer players, you may find yourself having difficulty in managing the ammo count of this plane, as you've only got 120 rounds in total, and whilst you can cleanly kill people out of the sky when you're accurate, if you happen to miss and mismanage your ammunition, you may find yourself out for the count. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But as always, until next time ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the sky.